At 12 p.m. on Sunday, a sealed white envelope was handed to the chairman of the PGA Tour. Inside was a list of 8 signatures and a non-negotiable 48-hour deadline. If Chief Executive Brian Rolapp isn't stripped of his power by Tuesday morning, 8 world-class stars will walk off the tour, boycott the upcoming playoffs, and trigger a nuclear antitrust lawsuit that will freeze billions of dollars overnight. Rolapp thought he could slice the PGA Tour into 2 tiers and sell off 50 years of history. He thought the players were just numbers on a balance sheet. He was dead wrong. The board is panicking, the corporate sponsors are freezing funding, and the clock is ticking down to 0. This is not a simple contract dispute over prize money. It is a cold-blooded, hostile takeover of the entire game. The competitors know that if they lose this fight, their favorite historic events will disappear forever. I honestly think Rolapp walked into this completely blind, but I want to know if you agree he deserves to be ousted. Drop your view in the comments below right now, and hit subscribe so we can track this fallout together as the clock runs out. The group finally cornered him in the player lounge on Sunday evening and handed him the document that changes everything. Rolapp barely looked at the first page before tossing the papers back onto the table. The CEO arrogantly told the representatives to leave his office immediately. Instead of arguing, the 8 players simply stood up and walked out. They did not yell or slam any doors. That cold, calculated silence is exactly what terrifies the board of directors. Loud arguments happen all the time in professional sports. Walking away in total silence means the players already have a backup plan fully operational. Ownership of the financial keys rests entirely with these 8 men. While the broadcast cameras only showed polite handshakes on the 18th green at Royal Birkdale, the real war was already underway. Massive new television deals supposedly made the executive completely untouchable. Such a dramatic misjudgment of player leverage would cost him dearly. Quiet phone calls started going out to major corporate sponsors on Friday night. Those corporate sponsors only care about television ratings and global star power. Behind closed doors, the 8 players made a very specific threat. Simple requests for better scheduling or higher purses were never the goal. Actual demands target the very top of the executive ladder. The people who pay millions of dollars to put their logos on the tee boxes started to ask very hard questions. They did not care about the internal board politics of the tour. They only cared about their money and their brand image. When the television numbers drop, the sponsors lose money. When the fans stop watching because the best players in the world are unhappy, the sponsors lose money. The 8 players knew this simple fact better than anyone else in the building. They understood that the CEO might ignore the fan base, but he could never ignore the executives signing the multi-million-dollar checks. The phone calls on Friday night were not polite requests for a dialogue. They were clear, uncompromising warnings. The players told the sponsors that the current leadership was putting the entire product at risk. They explained that the new corporate direction would alienate the core fan base permanently. The sponsors listened very carefully. They did not make any immediate public statements, but they started to pull their support behind the scenes. This quiet financial pressure was the first real strike in the war. It was a message that the players had the ultimate power to hurt the tour where it mattered most. This financial squeeze forced the CEO to reveal his true master plan, pushing the players past the point of no return. The master plan was a new schedule structure that divided the tour into 2 separate, unequal worlds. On one side, there would be a small group of corporate elite events with massive prize money. On the other side, there would be a secondary tier of events with smaller purses and minimal network television time. The players looked at this plan and saw the total destruction of traditional golf. Events that have been played for over 50 years were suddenly pushed into secondary status. These are the tournaments that built the history of the sport. They are the historic stops that the fans grew up watching every spring and summer. The 8 stars knew that if these events lost their elite status, they would eventually lose their title sponsors and fade away completely. Think about the actual courses that would suffer under this blueprint. These are not just random country clubs. They are historic layouts designed by the legendary architects of the game. They have hosted major championships for decades. The greens are famous, the layouts are brutal, and the crowds are legendary. When you walk down the 18th fairway at these specific tournaments, you can feel the history in the ground. Fans travel thousands of miles just to stand on those specific hills. If the tour demotes these events, the best players will not show up. If the best players do not show up, the fans will stay home. The local businesses that rely on tournament week will lose millions of dollars. The caddies will lose their weekly bags. It is a complete disaster for the entire local economy surrounding every historic stop on the calendar. The 8 stars grew up playing on these exact courses. They know the value of this tradition better than anyone sitting in a corporate boardroom. The executive logic made sense on a balance sheet, but it destroyed the soul of the game. The players realized that this was not just a schedule change, it was a direct attack on the legacy of professional golf. This specific policy was the exact line that could not be crossed. Once the players saw the final draft of the schedule, they knew they had to act immediately. They realized this new structure was a direct attack on their legacy, forcing them to identify exactly who was leading the charge. The leadership of this revolt came from a very specific group of men. These were not mid-tier golfers complaining about their travel schedules. This was the core group of world-class stars who held the real equity in the sport. They understood the television contracts, and they understood how to apply leverage where it hurt the executive team the most. They knew exactly where the weak points in the corporate structure were located. This group held the power to challenge the monopoly of the tour. But more importantly, they held the broadcast power. The television networks pay billions of dollars specifically to see these 8 men play golf on Sunday afternoons. If these men decided to skip events or speak out publicly against the executive board, the television ratings would crash instantly. The CEO thought he could control the narrative through polished PR press releases. He was completely wrong. The legal advisors for these 8 players started reviewing the tour's corporate bylaws. They searched for every clause and rule that could be used to challenge the authority of the CEO. They discovered that the independent board of directors could be legally pressured if the financial outlook of the tour became too volatile. The players were not just practicing on the range on the weekend. They were building a legal and financial bulletproof case to remove the man at the top. Having the power to challenge leadership is one thing, but what they did, behind closed doors on Saturday night, turned a strategic threat into a physical trap. The trap was set during a private meeting on Saturday evening. The representatives for the 8 players asked for a brief meeting with the CEO to discuss tournament dates. The CEO agreed, expecting a simple negotiation about a few minor schedule adjustments. The private meeting took place in a small office near the clubhouse locker area. Sitting behind a large desk, the CEO kept looking down at his phone. Instead of standing up to greet them, he simply pointed to the chairs across from him. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning. Speaking before anyone even sat down, the CEO used a series of corporate buzzwords. Optimizing the broadcast product and maximizing enterprise value were his main focus points. He completely ignored the fact that he was talking to the men who actually play the game and draw the crowds. To him, they were just names on an operational spreadsheet. Player input was never requested, family travel schedules were dismissed, and his schedule decision was presented as a finished product. Blind arrogance made him assume they would just nod and agree because he held the official title. He began detailing the corporate benefits of his new 2-tier model, using corporate speak like growth, modernization, and global expansion. The players just sat there in total silence and listened. When he finally finished his presentation, the lead player representative spoke up. He did not raise his voice or sound angry. He simply stated that the players would never accept second-tier status for their historic tournaments. The CEO chuckled and told them that they had no real choice in the matter. Then, he made a very specific, incredibly arrogant comment. He told them that they were just independent contractors operating on his platform and that the tour owned the rights to their schedules. That single sentence changed everything. It proved to the players that the executive had zero respect for their history, their sacrifices, or their contributions to the game. He viewed them as simple revenue assets on a balance sheet. The representative stood up, told him he was making the single biggest mistake of his executive career, and walked out of the room. That single comment shattered any chance of a quiet compromise. pushing the players to initiate a shadow campaign that Rolapp never saw coming. The shadow campaign began the exact moment they stepped out of that office. The players knew they could not win a standard public relations argument against the corporate machine. The tour has a massive communications department designed to spin every story. Instead, the players decided to wage war in the shadows. They started leaking specific, highly damning details about the new schedule to trusted golf journalists. They did not leak the entire document at once. They selectively leaked the exact details that would make traditional fans the most furious. They leaked the list of historic 50-year-old tournaments being demoted. They leaked the massive purse reductions for non-elite events. The media picked up the leaks immediately. The fan reaction was fast and furious. Social media exploded with outrage. The CEO tried to issue denials, but the players kept feeding verified documents to the press. Every time the executive stood before reporters, he was bombarded with questions about the leaked plans. He looked unprepared, flustered, and out of touch. The tour's PR strategy completely disintegrated. The players were controlling the entire news cycle without ever having to say a word on camera. They were letting the leaked corporate documents do all the talking. Media leaks were just the distraction, however, because the real weapon they aimed at the executive team was entirely financial. The real weapon was the sponsor money. While the press was focused on the schedule leaks, the players were placing direct calls to the marketing directors of the major automotive partners, watch manufacturers, and investment firms backing the tour. They showed them internal projections proving that the new schedule would tank viewership and alienate core consumers. Terrified of losing their multi-million-dollar investments, the sponsors began demanding immediate answers from the CEO. They wanted to know why the star players were on the verge of revolt. When the executive couldn't provide convincing answers, the sponsors executed the ultimate move. They froze their future rights payments. They informed the tour that no further funding would be released until the schedule crisis was fully resolved. When sponsor money is frozen, tournament purses shrink instantly. The 8 stars showed the financial data to the rest of the tour membership. If these frozen funds weren't unlocked, prize money for non-elite events would drop by as much as 40%. By showing the rest of the tour that the CEO's plan was threatening everyone's paycheck, the 8 stars unified the entire membership behind them. The financial freeze was the killing blow. The tour could not operate without that capital, and the players had successfully turned the corporate sponsors against the executive suite. With major sponsors pulling their support, Rolapp realized he was losing control of the boardroom, so he made a desperate move to fracture the group. He tried to divide the 8 players by offering private side deals to a few individual stars. His team reached out to their agents, offering guaranteed exemptions into elite events and massive off-the-book appearance fees in exchange for their silence. He calculated that if he could break 2 or 3 players away from the coalition, the entire revolt would collapse. It was a classic corporate divide-and-conquer strategy, and it failed spectacularly. The 8 players had already signed a binding pact with one another. When the secret offers came in, every single player rejected them and immediately exposed the bribes to the rest of the group. This betrayal only hardened their resolve. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the executive was willing to undermine his own players to protect his corporate position. Trust was completely gone. The players decided that asking for schedule revisions was no longer enough. The only acceptable outcome was his immediate and total removal. His attempt to divide them provided the exact justification the players needed to deploy their ultimate weapon, a formal demand for his resignation. Their legal team drafted a comprehensive legal and financial indictment of his leadership. The document detailed every corporate misstep, the loss of sponsor confidence, the drop in brand equity, and the legal liabilities created by his policies. All 8 stars signed the document and delivered it directly to the independent members of the board of directors on Sunday morning. The document came with a strict deadline. If the board did not remove the CEO within 48 hours, the 8 stars would execute a coordinated boycott of the upcoming playoff events and file a formal federal antitrust complaint against the tour's business practices. This was the nuclear option. A full-player boycott would tank television ratings, shatter broadcaster relationships, and destroy corporate valuation overnight. The 48-hour clock started ticking at noon on Sunday. The CEO spent the afternoon making frantic phone calls, trying to convince board members that the players were bluffing and would never actually walk away from major playoff purses. But the board members looked at the frozen sponsor funds, saw the unified player signature page, and realized the players already had their flights booked home. They were not bluffing. The board of directors convened an emergency session and read the demands in complete silence. The conditions were absolute. The CEO had to resign immediately, with zero severance, an interim leader had to be appointed, and the two-tier schedule had to be scrapped to restore the historic events. If the board refused, the boycott would go live on Monday morning. The board members knew the math. Without these 8 players, the broadcast contracts were worthless, and the tour had no product. The chairman called the CEO into the boardroom. He didn't ask him to sit down. He simply informed him that his executive contract was terminated, effective immediately, invoking the contract's moral and financial damage clause. The players had won. The corporate executive who tried to overhaul the soul of the sport was officially gone. The news broke across the golf world within minutes of his exit. Social media exploded as fans celebrated the protection of the game's historic tournaments. The interim leadership immediately reached out to title sponsors, promising an immediate return to traditional scheduling structures. Within hours, corporate partners released a joint statement confirming that all frozen funds had been unlocked and purses restored to full value. The tour's economic ecosystem was stabilized, but the balance of power had permanently shifted. The players proved that the stars drive the sport, not the suits in the executive suite. Executives learned a permanent lesson. You cannot treat the legends and traditions of the game like disposable line items on a spreadsheet. The historic tournaments now have protected status, and the players have secured a direct vote on all future schedule modifications. The legacy of the game has been secured for the next generation. If you think the fallout from this boardroom war is over, think again. Drop your thoughts on Brian Rolapp in the comments below. Tell me who you think should lead the tour next. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next breaking update.